Hello and welcome. I am Pranay Upadhyay and you are watching Namaste World, your daily window into the biggest stories shaping India and the world. We begin in South Asia. Pakistan's growing energy talks with Russia signals more than cheaper oil, raising sharp questions on US sanctions, China's role and regional power shifts. Back in America, White House remarks exposes regime change motives behind US strikes, intensifying fears of an undeclared war against Venezuela. In Asia, a lost Cold War nuclear device in the Himalayas is resurfacing as glacier melt, raising fresh fears for the Ganga. But the biggest news of the day, India has summoned Bangladesh High Commissioner over mounting security threats to its Dhaka mission, triggering visa center closure and renewed diplomatic tensions. All that and more. Global flashpoints, power plays and the stories that matter are coming up in this edition of Namaste World. India on Wednesday summoned Bangladesh's High Commissioner to New Delhi, Mohammad Riaz Hamadullah, to express strong concerns over deteriorating security situation around the Indian High Commission in Dhaka, amid reports of threats from extremist elements and inflammatory anti-India remarks by political figures. The Ministry of External Affairs appraised the Bangladesh diplomat of India's worries following announcements by certain extremist groups planning to disrupt security around Indian mission. Officials highlighted recent provocative statements, including those targeting India's northeastern states, and urged Bangladesh to fulfill its obligation under diplomatic protocols to protect foreign missions. In a related development, the Indian Visa Application Center (IVAC) at Jamuna Future Park in Dhaka, the primary facility handling Indian visa services in Bangladesh's capital, announced an early closure on Wednesday due to ongoing security concerns. A statement from the IVAC reads, and I quote, "In view of the ongoing security situation, we wish to bring you to kind notice that IVAC JFP Dhaka will be closed at 2 p.m. today. Applicants with scheduled slots for Wednesday were informed that their appointments would be rescheduled." The Ministry of External Affairs has also rejected what is described as false narrative propagated by extremist elements regarding recent events in Bangladesh, noticing that interim government has not conducted thorough investigation and shared substantial evidence with India on related incidents. However, India reaffirmed its long-standing ties with people of Bangladesh. India's Ministry of External Affairs stated in a statement that India has close and friendly relations with the people of Bangladesh rooted in the liberation struggle and strengthening through various developments and people-to-people initiatives. India remains in favor of peace and stability in Bangladesh and have consistently called for free, fair, inclusive and credible elections conducted in peaceful atmosphere. India expects the interim government in Dhaka to ensure the safety of its diplomatic mission and post in line with international obligations. Pakistan is edging closer to Russia for cheaper and more secure energy as talks expand from crude oil purchase to refineries and even steel plants. But beyond economics, this deepening engagement raises sharper geopolitical stakes. Will Washington apply the same sanctions yardstick to Pakistan as it has for India? Here is a report by Farhan Khan.
Pakistan is exploring a deeper energy partnership with Russia, with talks now underway between the energy ministries of both countries. Pakistan's Finance Minister Mohammad Aurangzeb has confirmed that discussions cover oil exploration, production and refining, areas where Moscow has long-standing expertise. In simple terms, Pakistan wants cheaper and more reliable energy, and Russia wants new buyers. Islamabad has already started purchasing Russian crude oil since 2023, a move that gained momentum after Western sanctions pushed Moscow to find alternative markets. Now, both sides are looking at a broader oil sector agreement that could lock in long-term cooperation. One proposal on the table is the upgrading of a refinery in Pakistan, with Russian companies potentially involved. Russian Energy Minister Sergei Sivilev had flagged the idea earlier, signaling that Moscow is willing to invest not just in selling oil, but in Pakistan's downstream energy infrastructure as well. There is more. Pakistan and Russia are also discussing the possibility of building another steel plant, pointing to a wider industrial relationship beyond hydrocarbons. For Pakistan, struggling with high import bills and chronic energy shortages, Russian engagement offers breathing space. For Russia, it is another step away from dependence on Western markets. But this story doesn't exist in isolation. It raises two uncomfortable and politically sensitive questions. First, the United States factor. US President Donald Trump has imposed tariffs and penalties on India for continuing to buy Russian oil, arguing that such purchases indirectly support Moscow's war economy. The question now is whether Washington will apply the same pressure on Pakistan. This is where accusations of hypocrisy may surface. Pakistan's military leadership, particularly Field Marshal Asim Munir, has cultivated relatively smooth ties with Washington. If Islamabad deepens energy ties with Russia without facing similar punitive measures, it will strengthen the perception that US sanctions policy is selective, tough on India, flexible with Pakistan when strategic interests align. Second, the China angle. Beijing has quietly encouraged closer Pakistan-Russia ties as part of its broader Eurasian strategy. China already has deep economic stakes in Pakistan through the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, and bringing Russia into the mix helps create a loosely aligned bloc that dilutes Western influence in South and Central Asia. This triangular dynamic matters for India. New Delhi has historically maintained strong energy and defense ties with Moscow, even as it balances relations with the West. A Russia that becomes more economically embedded with Pakistan under China's strategic umbrella could complicate India's long-standing comfort with Russia as a relatively neutral partner in South Asia. Will this shift fundamentally alter India-Russia relations? Not immediately, but it does signal that Moscow is diversifying its partnerships in ways that may no longer automatically align with Indian interests. So, while this oil deal discussion may sound technical, it is anything but. At its core, it reflects Russia's pivot eastward, Pakistan's search for economic relief, China's quiet hand in regional realignments, and a looming test for US consistency on sanctions. Energy, once again, is reshaping geopolitics. With Farhan Khan, Bureau Report, India Today Global.
The White House says US strikes in Latin America waters target drug smugglers, but a startling admission suggests a far bigger objective, with Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro now openly named as a real target. Questions are mounting over legality, escalation, and intent. Is Washington quietly waging an undeclared regime change war in the Americas? Here is a report by Srijita Sen Majumdar.
The White House just accidentally revealed the real reason behind America's military strikes in Latin American waters. Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, one of President Donald Trump's most trusted advisors, has suggested the real target isn't drugs. It's Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro. In comments published by Vanity Fair magazine, Wiles said Trump wants to keep blowing boats up until Maduro cries uncle. Her exact words, "People way smarter than me on that say he will." The statement directly contradicts the administration's official narrative that these strikes are part of an anti-narcotics campaign. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy didn't mince words. He posted on social media, "So, not a war on the cartels, it's regime change. Either way, totally illegal and nonsensical." The timing is striking. Wiles' comments emerged just hours after the Pentagon announced 3 more boat strikes in the Eastern Pacific Ocean that killed 8 people. These attacks are intensifying. US forces have now killed more than 90 people in what the Pentagon calls counter-narcotics operations. The military has provided only grainy footage as evidence the boats were carrying drugs, labeling victims as narco-terrorists.
Obviously, we had a classified hearing, so the details of which we can't discuss. It's, I believe, our 22nd or 23rd bipartisan engagement. We'll continue to engage with Congress on this. We're headed to the House now to do a similar briefing and provide updates on this counter-drug mission, which is focused on dismantling the infrastructure of these terrorist organizations that are operating in our hemisphere, undermining the security of Americans, killing Americans, poisoning Americans. And this has been a highly successful mission that's ongoing and continued, and we're pleased to be here today to update Congress on how that's developing and how that's moving forward.
But legal experts are raising red flags. They say targeting vessels in international waters likely violates both US and international law, amounting to extrajudicial executions. UN experts issued a scathing report last month. They stated these attacks don't appear conducted within the context of self-defense or armed conflict, violating fundamental human rights law, prohibiting arbitrary deprivation of life. The escalation is unmistakable. Trump has repeatedly declared Maduro's days are numbered. Last week, US forces raided and seized an oil tanker off Venezuela's coast. Venezuela called it international piracy. The president has also declared Venezuela's entire airspace closed and refused to rule out a ground invasion. Trump recently received FIFA's Peace Prize and has campaigned against more US wars. Yet his administration is clearly ramping up pressure on left-wing governments in Latin America, including Venezuela and Colombia. The White House released its national security strategy last week, emphasizing the need to establish US preeminence in the Americas. Maduro has accused Washington of creating a pretext for war, though he's expressed openness to diplomacy while rejecting what he calls a slave's peace. The stakes are enormous. Venezuela sits on massive oil reserves. Opposition figure Maria Corina Machado, who won the Nobel Peace Prize this year, has promised to privatize the oil sector should Maduro fall. Washington's relations with Caracas have been hostile since Hugo Chavez rose to power in the early 2000s. Heavy US sanctions have crippled Venezuela's economy for years. With Shrijita Sen Mojumdar, Bureau Report, India Today Global.
A forgotten Cold War mission in the Indian Himalayas is haunting the present. A nuclear-powered spy device lost near Nanda Devi nearly 60 years ago remains untraced, even as the glaciers melt and disasters intensifies. Could this buried relic resurface to threaten the Ganga and millions who depend on it? Here is a report by Rudrashish Kanjilal.
A long-buried Cold War secret is resurfacing from the heights of the Indian Himalayas. Nearly 6 decades ago, a nuclear-powered listening device left near Nanda Devi, the country's second highest peak, vanished into thin ice and rock. Today, questions remain. Where is it now? And could it threaten the Ganga? In 1965, fears over China's emerging nuclear program led the CIA and India's Intelligence Bureau to launch a covert mission. Their goal: install a radioisotope-powered sensor on Nanda Devi, high enough to monitor Chinese missiles and nuclear tests across the border. But the Himalayas had other plans. A sudden blizzard forced the team to cache the device on the mountain. When climbers returned the following season, the RTG, radioisotope thermoelectric generator, and its plutonium core had disappeared, likely swept away by avalanche or buried in the glacier. An RTG uses heat from radioactive decay to generate electricity. No moving parts, reliable for decades, often used in space missions or remote locations. It is not a nuclear bomb and cannot explode. Its danger lies in radiation exposure if the containment is breached. Since then, India and the US search missions have failed to locate the generator. Governments remain tight-lipped. Some suggest India quietly retrieved it. Others think it's still entombed somewhere in the unstable ice and rock of Nanda Devi. A 1978 survey by India's Atomic Energy Commission found no trace of plutonium in local rivers, but the device's exact location remains unknown. The stakes are high. Nanda Devi's glaciers feed the Rishi Ganga and Dholi Ganga, which join the Alaknanda and Bhagirathi to form the Ganga, the lifeline of hundreds of millions of downstream. Experts say a buried, intact RTG poses limited immediate risk, but any breach could release radioactive material into meltwater and sediments, threatening heavily populated plains. Local communities and environmentalists worry every time floods, avalanches, or ice rock collapses strike Uttarakhand's fragile valleys. Warming glaciers and more frequent Himalayan disasters like the 2021 Chamoli flood have brought the lost device back into focus. Scientists warn that retreating ice could eventually expose or disturb the RTG, creating a low probability, high impact scenario. For India and the United States, it's a reminder that a Cold War strategic gamble in the high Himalayas left a long-lived question mark over one of the world's most sacred and densely relied upon rivers. Nearly 60 years later, the mystery of Nanda Devi's lost nuclear device endures, a hidden hazard perched above the Ganga, waiting silently in the ice. With Rudrashish Kanjlal, Bureau Report, India Today Global.
As we wrap up today's edition of Namaste World, here is a quick look at the top stories making waves around the world. President Donald Trump has ordered a total blockade of sanctioned Venezuelan oil tankers, escalating pressures on President Nicolás Maduro and raising fears of war, legal fallouts, and rising global oil prices. EU President Ursula von der Leyen has urged Europe to take full responsibility for its own security, warning the continent can no longer rely on others to shape its future. South Africa is in shock after popular radio and club DJ Warwick Stock, known as DJ Waras, was shot dead in a broad daylight in central Johannesburg. And that brings us to the end of today's edition of Namaste World, from breakthroughs in technology and business to political developments and natural disasters. Stay tuned as we bring you the latest updates, key developments, and more from New Delhi to New York. See you again tomorrow, same time, right here on Namaste World.